We're talking Arizona Cardinals today. We're talking NFC West. Have the Arizona Cardinals begun the path to closing the massive gap on the San Francisco 49ers in the NFC West with today's guest, Alex Clancy of Locked On Cardinals, their new head coach, and what's going on with Kyler Murray and a whole lot more coming up on today's Peacock and Williamson.
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look into the NFL on the field and in the front office. With elite breakdowns, next-level analysis, and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
To the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock and Matt Williamson with you, as always, at BD Peacock, at Williamson NFL on Twitter. Thanks, everybody, for making us your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. As we bring on today's esteemed guest, he's the host of Locked On Cardinals, Mr. Alex Clancy. Alex, how's it going, man? It's always a fun offseason when your team is hiring a new head coach and a new GM, and it's a new era of Arizona Cardinals football.
Yeah, and the Arizona Cardinals slander, I took the under on FanDuel in less than 3.5 seconds to start this show, so I cashed on that with your incredible cold intro. Thank you for that, Brian Peacock.
I had to throw a dig at you, especially when you weren't on the screen and you weren't didn't have a hot mic to say anything about it. Looking at this Cardinals team, so Monti Ossenfort and Johnathan Gannon, did they get it right in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, you got a grade on a curve, and I don't say that jokingly. Like, I think any move outside of running it back from last year would have been a win. And I think this is the biggest win here is Michael Bidwell, because what he's done up until this point is the antithesis of what he's done since removing Steve Keim and Cliff Kingsbury from post. So if he's really talking about changing things, I've been calling it Arizona Cardinals 2.0. He's checked two of the biggest boxes, two of the biggest decisions, if not the two biggest decisions he's ever had to make as, since taking over owner, he's done. So it's a win regardless, because it's removed the past and given possibilities for the future.
So not to put words in your mouth, but just the way you said that, it sounds like you're implying that the Cardinals had as bad of coach GM combination as there was in the league last year.
I mean, I think that the beneficial move would have been to move off of both of them, Bill Belichick it, as I call it, at the end of the 2021 season. Really start fresh and do it that way instead of forcing Michael Bidwell's hand. But I just think that there were limitations. And I think with limitations breeds the lack of potential to actually win at a level that any NFL franchise should be able to. The elevation of talent was null, in my opinion. The drafting wasn't great, trading for Marquise Brown and then drafting Trey McBride in the second round when there were severe needs elsewhere. I was called a joke in the beginning. I'm like, look at what's happening. So yes, I think that it was a tough spot last year with injuries, without injuries. It was a tough spot, and the Cardinals have removed themselves from that now.
Having heard now from Monti Ossenfort, the GM, and Johnathan Gannon, the head coach, and press conferences, and how would you grade them? Has it made you more confident in them? And I know it can be misleading. Sirianni had an awful first press conference, and his team is just in the Super Bowl. So, it's not everything, and some guys are really good interviewers and get head coaching jobs, really good in front of the in front of the media, and they can not be great with X's and O's, not be great leaders of men. So you can't know everything by an initial press conference, but did it make you feel better about the Johnathan Gannon hire, or the other way around when you start to hear them speak and hear their vision for the team?
Yeah, I mean, he knocked it out of the park, and I think that was obvious because he is a raw guy. He's Dan Campbell much more than he is Cliff Kingsbury, which is great. And I've compared Dan Campbell to what the Arizona Cardinals need, regardless of win-loss record. What Dan Campbell has done in Detroit is completely revamp everything that's happened over the last 50 years in Detroit. And it's fun and it's exciting and the fans are bought in. That's exactly what the Cardinals need injected into their bloodstream. So yes, Johnathan Gannon won the press conference, and there were a couple interesting answers that he said that weren't planogram, that weren't spec, that weren't coach speak, that made me think, oh, baby. Like, how can you not get excited for some of the things that he said? So, yes, Monti Aussenfort, with his deep scouting background, winning multiple Super Bowls as part of the front office with New England. And then Tennessee didn't necessarily end the way that it started when he was there as AGM, but both of them together are ushering in a new regime that you can't be more excited about as of right now.
Yeah, I like that Campbell comparison for an organization that hasn't done a lot of winning over any of our lifetimes. Inject it with some energy. That's great to say. And you also mentioned Trey McBride earlier. I'm sitting here looking at this roster. I mean, tight end's like the only spot I can come up with where they don't need anybody. Like every other spot on the roster, they shouldn't ignore or turn their nose up at a good prospect.
I will add one more on that safety.
Okay.
With Budda Baker, because Jalen Thompson is now going to become a household name as the backup dancer or 1A. He just got a contract extension, very team friendly. I think it was under $30 million for 3 years. Him out of Wazoo and Budda Baker out of Washington have really just solidified. They're the only pillars on defense, as I call it, solidified set and forget defensive players the Arizona Cardinals have under contract for 2023.
And you think any other positions on the table, in round 2, round 3, whatever.
There needs to be player development, massive, because if you look at the defensive side of the ball, and you're right about tight end, Trey McBride, Zach Ertz for the next 5 years or 7 years, overlapping in whatever way it's going to happen. That's another one, but I think more of an impactful would be safety. If you look at the defensive side of the ball, Zaven Collins, Isaiah Simmons, Byron Murphy, Zach Allen, Cam Thomas, Jay Sanders. There's so much incredible talent that just needs the molding, that needs the clay thing to turn on. And for somebody just to mold that talent into what will be very inexpensive play for a while now, aside from Byron Murphy and Zach Allen who are in contract years. But there's more talent than what the roster jumps out to you at this point. It just needs coaching.
Yeah, makes sense.
Even quarterback? You didn't mention quarterback as a position that the Cardinals don't.
Yeah. Well, see,
something has to happen there.
Yeah, well, so this is my thing is like, I don't include quarterback in any conversation with personnel. Until, like, the only uncomfortable conversation I haven't had to have, thank you, Brian Peacock, is if this year, but the thing is, if Kyler Murray misses 4 games and they start 0-4, or he misses 7 games and they start 1-6, we're putting all of these on a back burner until 2024 when he can play a full season. If he comes back in week 4 and they're 2-2 and they signed whatever backup quarterback they're going to sign, whatever, and he can play this year and he doesn't play well, we can have that conversation. But I'm not doing that yet. Like that, it's too clickbaity for me. I still think he's the guy. Johnathan Gannon said that they're going to build the offense specifically around him. All that Cliff Kingsbury and Kyler Murray did was a coach who wanted to coach a player since the player was in high school. They put it two together like, this is going to work, and it just didn't.
So if he can't start the season, though, that's why I did lump quarterback in. You think you just run McCoy back, or do you still think they need to grab somebody from outside the organization?
I think they need to grab somebody. Like I think that this is like the reason why Vance Joseph didn't get the head coaching job, the reason why Adrian Wilson didn't get the GM job. Everything needs to be outsourced at this point. A complete hard reset. Colt McCoy, if it is Colt McCoy, fine. But the limitations on Colt McCoy his ceiling is so much lower than people think. His floor may be higher, but they need to sign. I mean, even if it's Jimmy Garoppolo for $8 million for a year, like they need to get an able-bodied average quarterback to come in and play just in case Kyler Murray doesn't play for the first 10 weeks. Yeah. We have no idea at this point.
Is there a chance that he doesn't play at all? Like, what is there a better timeline now that we're further away from that injury?
Well, I mean, we saw the video, his Instagram video of him doing pretty good workouts for a guy that just had surgery not a month ago. So ACL's tough. Like, I don't compare him to Darren Sproles a lot, but it's like Darren Sproles was like 98% muscle, never got hurt. San Diego, whatever. And then he tore his ACL with New Orleans, I think, and then came back. Like, stature doesn't matter with recovery. And I don't think people like Josh Allen would recover faster than Kyler Murray. That's not true. It just depends on pain tolerance. It depends on how he reacts to treatment. And we don't know. It could be 4 weeks. It could be all year. Like at this point, putting a pinpoint on one, I think would be a fool's errand, at least this early.
I hate talking about injuries. I'm not a doctor, obviously,
right?
But I have been around around a while, and I do think elite athletes heal quicker and better than others. And of course, everyone in the NFL is an elite athlete, but he's an elite athlete amongst elite athletes.
Yeah. And Adrian Peterson ruined it for everybody. Like we wouldn't even be having this conversation if Adrian Peterson didn't come back in 6 months.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. He's bionic, so you can't compare people to Adrian Peterson.
Right.
One last one on Kyler Murray here.
Yeah.
Because could an injury like an ACL even help his development in a way where you take your legs away from you a little bit as you're coming back? And there's a story from Steve Young back in the day where he talked about one of his coaches like handcuffing his legs together, basically tying his feet together. It's like, you can't run today. Sorry. Figure it out otherwise. Is that something that could help maybe someone like Kyler Murray? And then you add his legs on top of, just a little bit more development there, maybe a little change. You're getting a little older, new head coach, a little skewed perspective on life even, and what's funny is I saw a video of him working out and hugging it up with Johnathan Gannon at the facility, and he was right on the bike. And you're right, he was pretty furious on the bike. He's wearing a t-shirt of a band called the Smiths, and they're not, they're not a super popular band, I think, for a lot of people. I love the Smiths, but kind of aloof, kind of moody. I was like, oh, Kyler Murray's a fan of the Smiths. His whole persona now starts to make a little bit more sense. I don't know if it's like, I think you can buy a Smiths shirt at Target. I don't know if it's just a shirt he buys like, I like this shirt, or if he actually likes the band. But like, I know a lot of friends. I have a lot of friends that love the Smiths, and I was like, oh, I totally get who Kyler Murray is now if he's a huge Smiths fan.
He's full of surprises, that rascal. He's full of surprises. No, but back to your question about him running the ball, like ideally they shore up the offensive line. He has a second and a half more in the pocket, and he can call an offense and run plays in an offense that isn't wide receiver screens or go routes on 3rd and 8. Like, he gets knocked a lot for his middle of the field passing, mid-range passing. There wasn't a whole lot of that in this offense. Like, it was either deep shots, short dink and dunk. And I don't know if that's because Cliff didn't believe in him. I don't know if that's because he didn't have a lot of time, especially last year. But something is going to come out of this year with Kyler Murray and a new OC, a new defensive-minded head coach, who said very interestingly, I'm paraphrasing, we're going to run an offense that caters most to Kyler Murray, but he's a GM head coach, Johnathan Gannon, and the Cardinals haven't had that. We don't even know if he's going to call the defense yet. He's going to be a throwback. I'm the head coach of this team, but I may not have any hand in actual play calling, which is so novel now when that's what it always was. So with Kyler, like, he's a work in progress still, and I get a lot of flack for that because he's going into year 5. But if we can go with the rule of the front of the line, in front of the line of scrimmage is lava, I'm good with that. Keep him behind the line of scrimmage as much as possible. Have his legs be a nice to have, not a need to have to run the offense.
All right, more on the direction of the Arizona Cardinals here as it skews into a new Arizona Cardinals team from top to bottom, but not at quarterback necessarily. What will this team look like going forward and beyond with Alex Clancy of Locked On Cardinals? Today's episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by FanDuel. NFL season is over. That doesn't mean you can't bet on NFL football anymore, because there's odds up for next year's Super Bowl champion. There's draft props at FanDuel, but the midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, super easy to use. Then bet on everything from money line, point scorers, threes drained in NBA and college hoops. Plus, FanDuel lets you combine your bets for a bigger payout with same-game parlays, which is, again, the website's super easy to use, and it's awesome building those parlays. It's a lot of fun. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets back when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Real quick, Alex, when it comes to Johnathan Gannon and the hiring process, and it started to be pretty clear they were waiting for somebody who's in the Super Bowl the longer that went on. Do you think that was by design? Was he their guy early, or was there some lack of interest from candidates early in the process of coming to the Arizona Cardinals?
I think both could be true. And I'm not really a fence, waddler, but I think both could be true. Monty Aussenfort had an eye out for Johnathan Gannon early on in the process. The Sean Payton thing was just bizarre. We don't know if it was just a leverage ploy to get to Denver. We don't know if Arizona, and I think just Arizona wouldn't pay him what he wants, because they're already paying 2 guys who aren't part of the organization anymore. So I don't know if Michael Biddle wanted to shell out $25 million a year for a guy who hasn't coached in a while, who hasn't won a Super Bowl in 10 years. I think it's a little bit of both. And I wish I had a little bit more of a succinct answer, but I think it's a little bit of both.
Alex, let's talk DeAndre Hopkins here. I mean, is he as good as gone? What would it cost the Bears, Ravens, Patriots, whomever to acquire his services, in your opinion?
I hope he doesn't leave.
I bet, yeah.
Interesting thing that Joe Corey tweeted out or had it on a podcast, a capologist said that his no trade clause was voided after the PED suspension, which is interesting. I was unaware of that. I can say when I'm wrong. It happens once every year or so, right, Peacock? But I think that but that's interesting. Well, that's right. But yeah, it's people don't realize how incredible a talent he still is. In my opinion, I loved him before he got here when he was 4 years younger than he is now. The reason why DeAndre Hopkins is so important is because he doesn't need speed to be successful. He's never needed speed to be successful. His catch radius is otherworldly. He still has the best hands in the NFL. Okay. You don't need to scheme for him. And that's why it scares the hell out of me, because ask anybody listening to this, who your favorite team is. Ask your friend, would you trade for DeAndre Hopkins? Everybody would say, how much? Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter. He's still there. He's still top 10. Like if he played 17 weeks and he got the looks he's supposed to, he's 1,500 yards, 10, 12 touchdowns. Like rinse and repeat. So to answer your question, what would the trade capital be? It's twofold. One, if it's a contender, it needs to be a first-round pick. You cannot trade to a contender for a second-round pick, which is a glorified third-round pick. You can't get the 58th or 60th pick in the draft for DeAndre Hopkins. It's got to be a late first, because the Cardinals, if they're going to go that route, they're going to need to understand that they need to draft a wide receiver with that pick.
Yeah.
Like Hollywood Brown's not a wide receiver. He just isn't. Him and DeAndre Hopkins would be great together. And my biggest fear came to light, them two never playing meaningful snaps in 2022. So we couldn't see what it could have been like to run it back.
I agree with you. Much like Larry, he's going to age gracefully. Yeah. He's not just going to fall off a cliff.
And he's 31.
Right.
Steve Smith played till he was 36 and he relied on speed. Like I don't get it.
Yeah, ball skills, body positioning. His hands aren't going to get smaller overnight either.
Right.
So, that attitude. You want that guy who's got that attitude. It's like, that's my ball.
Yeah.
What's on the to-do list? So Monty gives you a call, Alex, and he's like, I need some advice. What's step one? What are we doing here? Free agency and the draft. What's the plan for the Arizona Cardinals?
Twofold. If he calls me, listen, it's really going to be predicated upon what Chicago does. Like if they trade out of one and then Houston takes CJ Stroud, you'd think Will Levis, we have no idea what's going to happen through the combine and everything. If there is a team like Indy who wants to move up a pick, or a team like Tennessee who wants to move up 8 spots, or whatever, if there's a San Francisco to Miami package to move up to 3, it'd be very difficult to pass up 2 future firsts and a first-round pick swap in this year. But with Johnathan Gannon, with Monti Ossenfort, with their deep scouting roots, both of them. Johnathan Gannon was a scout for a couple years also before becoming a coach. You look at Will Anderson and the Cardinals' huge void at pass rush. It's like, how do you not just set, forget, pick, keep it simple, stupid, and move the hell on? And that's why it's a huge issue, because it's like, it's not Steve Keim, so you have a huge leg up there with you acquire more picks. It's great for the future, but I don't think you need to get 2 future firsts when it takes one solid offseason to go from where they are now to middle of the pack. One solid draft with a full slate of picks, a solid offseason, some key free agents or some key re-signings, health, and the right leader. I think it could take 1 year and maybe a draft next year for them to completely revamp this entire organization.
So, Alex, real quick, I know you're up against it. Last thing I have for you, Isaiah Simmons is now a slot corner, if people don't realize it. Are we happy with him? Has he found a niche? Is he a bust? What's the story of this guy? This might not be a short answer, huh?
Isaiah Simmons never should have been drafted by the Arizona Cardinals.
Right.
And that's really tough to resonate with now. It should have been Tristan Wirfs, should have been a no doubt set and forget, was the highest rated offensive lineman in Super Bowl history, I think, his rookie year with Tampa Bay. Isaiah Simmons is an absolute specimen.
Right.
Hassan Reddick, who was the original cautionary tale by the Arizona Cardinals, could fit in Isaiah Simmons' pocket. 6'3", 245, sub 4, 540. He is absolutely incredible. He's smart. He's fast. Not great in coverage, even though they continue to play him off ball or play him in coverage against tight ends and other stars from other teams. What I understand this isn't a perfect fit, but I do believe that they need to move him to the pass rush position a little bit more, depending on who they're playing against and who
he was good at it,
who they sign. See quarterback, hit quarterback. He is so fast. He hits so hard. And I know that's not the perfect football answer. I know that a slot corner is where he is. But you know what? Pick up his fifth-year option the second you can. I'm not sure if you're able to. I know it's coming up, or the opportunity is soon.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So fifth year, they did not pick up Hassan Reddick's fifth-year option, and look at what happened. He balled out after Chandler Jones got hurt, went to Carolina, now in Philly. They need to – that's the biggest issue they need to figure out, Matt Williamson. That's the biggest issue, because if he can unlock this defense, you have him. He's on your team already. Yeah. And everybody around the NFL is like, I hope they don't. I hope they don't, because we will. That's exactly what everybody else is thinking. So they need to figure it out, because they have a trophy wife who has a PhD in bioeconomics on their roster already, and they're speaking a different language. They need to get the Rosetta Stone. They need to go take a class, figure out the language, and keep him wearing an Arizona Cardinals uniform for the next decade.
Well, the good news is the Cardinals finally found a coach that knows how to use Hassan Reddick, so that maybe they can figure out Isaiah Simmons as well. Always a pleasure, Alex. Thank you so much for joining us. You guys got to check him out daily at Locked On Cardinals. He's Locked On NFL crew as well. Always a pleasure. Thanks, man.
Thanks for having me, guys.
All right, next. We've got an overflow question, Matt.
Okay.
In regards to our last mailbag episode about the number of Super Bowl winning starting quarterbacks there are in the NFL. And it's really fun to look back on how many great quarterbacks have played at a time. And did we just not realize how great of an era we went through in the NFL over the last, couple of decades? Next. Today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. If you've ever dreamed of becoming a GM, an NFL GM, running your franchise from top to bottom, well, this is the game for you. We've had so much playing this in-house against each other. It's the mobile game app, Ultimate Football GM. It's your turn to compete as well. We're going to give you more information on how you can compete as well with Ultimate Football GM with some of the hosts here on the Locked On Podcast Network. With Ultimate Football GM, you're responsible for controlling the destiny of your franchise top to bottom, hiring the right coaches and coordinators, trading players, navigating your franchise through free agency and the draft, all the ups and downs of a season, all in a challenging and realistic game world. Ultimate Football GM is completely free, playable offline, play on the go, and as you want to, and when you want to. Locked On listeners also get a 100% free boost in-game to their franchise when using promo code Locked On. That's Locked On, all caps, in the game. So check it out today. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app stores. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. To the mailbag, Matt, where on Wednesday's episode, or no, what day? I don't even know what day it is, to be honest with you. Anyway.
Earlier in the week.
Earlier on in the week, you can find the podcast. There's a really interesting nugget that actually Mel Kiper brought to your attention, Matt, about how many starting Super Bowl winning quarterbacks are in the league currently. And there's only 4. And there's an opportunity there, or there's a chance that maybe there's only 1 left in a year from now when Patrick Mahomes, which is kind of wild to think about it. So, like, how many has there been in the past? And Jared, one of our listeners on Twitter, asked us, what's the highest number of Super Bowl winning starting quarterbacks there's ever been? And a little too much work for me in the last 24 hours to go through and look at every single year. But I kind of looked at some eras, and the initial thing I thought of was like, well, let's go back to when Peyton Manning retired, because there's still Brady, there's still Breeze, and there's all those quarterbacks. So how many was there?
And Eli, right. Yeah.
Back
Rodgers.
I just picked a random year, 2015. And Matt, I might have struck gold because it might be the most at that time. And there was twice as many. So in 2015, there were 8 active starting quarterbacks that had won a Super Bowl. Brady, Peyton Manning, Eli Manning, Drew Brees, Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, Ben Roethlisberger, and Joe Flacco. So there was 8, twice as many as there are today. And then there was, future winning starting quarterbacks like Matthew Stafford that were playing in the league, hadn't won yet. So And I didn't go far enough back in every single year, every single era to find out if that's the most, but I'm willing to bet that might be the most, Matt.
It's interesting because I read that question. I'm like, that's a great question. I wish I knew the answer to that. Is this really unusual or not? To have 4, it seems like a super low number, but maybe the average over history is 5 or, I mean, who knows? And then I thought, that's too much work for me though. So maybe I'll retweet it and somebody will look for it, or maybe someone listening now will actually give us the real answer. But you did some serious work on it. I mean, you didn't break down every year, but I think that's pretty impressive. And goes back to our quarterback conversation too, that we might look back in history and that's as good a quarterback, the most Hall of Famers playing at once at that position. You know what I mean?
We might not have realized at the time how great of a quarterback era we were in, especially when some of those guys have started to age out and haven't been nearly replaced in numbers. There's been, really good quarterbacks. Right. There's Burrow and there's Josh Allen, and those guys haven't won a quarterback yet. Now Jalen Hurts in the conversation, and we'll see if Justin Herbert is, where his career goes. But maybe that number could actually rise, but it's looking like it's getting smaller rather than getting bigger right now because some other quarterbacks like Stafford and Rodgers might not be playing long either.
Right.
When you, but then I went back just kind of into the 90s and just kind of went through the process and I wanted to see, how does that match up historically? And, like 4 or 5 is kind of not that weird because I went to the early 90s and I thought, okay, well, let's see if, Jim McMahon's still starting in the league, right? And he won a Super Bowl with the Bears. And then you had Joe Montana, who was still starting, and he won, multiple Super Bowls with the 49ers. Even after he was on the Kansas City Chiefs, he was a starter with Super Bowl rings. And early 90s, you have Troy Aikman, who wins a Super Bowl now. So then you start counting it up, and there's Mark Rippon. But there's so many quarterbacks who didn't win. And I was like, oh man, all-time great. Jim Kelly doesn't have one. Dan Marino doesn't have one, and it was like, oh man, the number's not as big as I thought. So it's kind of, through the 90s, it was kind of 4 or 5. And then Joe Montana retires, but then Steve Young wins one. So it's still kind of the same number. And then, Mark Rippon's gone. And some of these other quarterbacks from the 80s and definitely the 70s are now gone. And then Favre wins one. And then Elway finally wins one, So if you look at the early 90s, there's all these great quarterbacks, but, Favre and Elway hadn't won yet. And even in the early 90s, Steve Young hadn't won one yet. So as some of the quarterbacks age out, then new quarterbacks win. And I think because of a lot of the dynasties that happen in the NFL, there's not as many Super Bowl winning quarterbacks that are still starting in the league as you think there might have been. So the answer might have been, it feels low now because of the era we just went through, more so than it's super low now based on the rest of history.
Yeah. And basically what you said was, it takes a while till you're good enough to take your team to a Super Bowl. What Mahomes is doing is so rare because he has so much in front of him still. Like, I mean, I thought of some eras, I thought immediately, well, maybe I can cheat and look at like the first 5 or 6 Super Bowls or the first 10 Super Bowls. But then Bradshaw gets 4 out of 6 and Starr's not around anymore. Dawson's not around anymore. Like those guys couldn't hang around during that stretch. And then I thought Joe Gibbs, he coached 3 different quarterbacks to Super Bowls for Washington. But was Doug Williams a starter much after that, or Rippon, or, you know what I mean? Like they weren't exactly lighting it up with their next team or even had a next team,
Yeah, and it was funny. So you look at McMahon, and I was like, "Oh, McMahon's a good one," because
there's a single one. He's like the Flacco one,
and he played for a lot longer than I remembered. But he didn't have a lot of good seasons. And there was like, "Oh, but in this year, like '93, oh, he is starting in '93, so he still counts. Yeah. So let's count this year."
That's a good one to sneak one in there. Yeah,
still only 4. And kind of the same with Rippon. It's like still only 4 or 5 even. So I think the takeaway from that is how great of an era of quarterbacks we saw in the 2000s, 2010s.
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, there's a lot of Hall of Famers. And maybe even a guy like Rivers, I know he didn't have a ring, doesn't get in, or Matt Ryan, or some of the, Stafford, who does have a ring, but there was a dozen that have Hall of Fame cases, I'm guessing off the top of my head, and some slam dunks.
And for the 2020s, looking ahead, is there some teams and young quarterbacks that are going to go get their first ring and go beat Patrick Mahomes? That's the key to this thing growing again in the future, and not just continuing to dwindle down into 1 or 2 quarterbacks that have won Super Bowls that are active now that all these older quarterbacks that were good for so long, like Tom Brady this offseason, are retiring, and we're going to see a few more probably in the next couple seasons.
Yeah, but I think a really fun point though is what you brought up when we talked about this is there might be one next year, two. You know what I mean? Like Mahomes wins another. Chances Stafford, Rodgers, and Wilson are starting again. I mean, Wilson's career could go down the toilet. Stafford could hang it up. Rodgers could be on a mountain somewhere. Who knows?
4 is one thing if all 4 are really competitive still, but it could literally be one in a calendar year or in 2 years too. So
like if the 4 were Wilson, Mahomes, Allen, and someone that's middle-aged, Cousins, you know what I mean? Random like that. Like, oh, okay.
What if Rodgers wins it and then retires, and it's still you still losing one, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Stafford, same way, right?
Yeah, or if he doesn't retire, you still don't add the list.
All right, good stuff. Thanks everybody for making Peacock and Williamson your first listen every day. If you've got questions, if you've got follow-ups to any of the topics we talked about, or want to get involved in next week's Twitter mailbag, hit us up at BD Peacock, at Williamson NFL. Talk to you then, right here, Peacock and Williamson.